at all. However, as too many people have learned the hard way, that
How will planning for retirement be any different for people who are 50, 45 now? Or is it always going to be the same?
financial advice is frequently doled out as if one size fit all. However, as too many people have learned the hard way, that is not the case. It turns out that financial advice is highly personal, so you must tailor what you're hearing to your specific situation. Here to highlight 5 financial rules to rethink is Manisha Thakor, personal finance expert and co-author of Get Financially Naked. Hi there, Manisha. Great to see you again.
Hi, Tanya. Great to be here.
So, Manisha, why do people tend to take cookie cutter financial advice without really evaluating if it fits their own financial lifestyle?
Because it's just so darn overwhelming, Tanya. There are just so many options today. You know, unlike 40 years ago when my parents got married and there were only a handful of options for investments, a handful of ways that you can borrow money. Today, the choices are unlimited. And so when we can grasp on to a simple rule of thumb, we do.
Right, absolutely. All right, so you have a list of some of these simple rules of thumb, some of these financial rules that we should rethink. Let's start with the first one. Always invest in stocks if you are young. Now, why do you say we should rethink this rule of thumb?
It's that first word, always. So I think that statement would be correct if it said, it's a good idea to consider investing in stocks if you're young and if you've paid off all your credit card debt and any other double-digit interest rate debt that you have, and if you're able to keep that money in the stock market for at least 5 years. The 2 biggest mistakes I'm seeing with young people are not realizing how expensive it is to be carrying consumer debt. You'll get a guaranteed return on your money if you pay that off. The second mistake I'm seeing is people confusing when to invest for the long term versus protecting their money for their short term. Let's say you needed money last week. If you had been in the stock market, you would have been out of luck.
Right.
So you want to make sure that you can keep the money in for the long run.
Right. But our attitude toward investing has changed somewhat in light of the recession. So what would you say to first-time investors about jumping into the market?
So broadly speaking, if you meet those 2 parameters, you've paid off that high interest debt, you can keep your money in for the long run, don't feel scared of the market. Over the long run, stocks are simply pieces of ownership in underlying businesses. And if you purchase those businesses at reasonable prices and the businesses prosper, so too will your investments over the long run. Right now, stocks look fairly reasonably priced, and if you buy good companies, odds are in your favor. Your portfolio will rise, as do the prospects of those companies over time.
All right, that makes perfect sense. So another financial rule you believe that we should all rethink is that renting is like throwing money down the drain. You say this is not true.
No, it's not. And I think this is one of the fallacies that has come up over the years. So if you fast forward to when this notion first came up, it was back in the 60s when people could pretty much only get a 15 or 30 year fixed rate mortgage, and then they fast forwarded into the 1970s and 1980s where we had explosive inflation. So you had this whole generation of individuals that were paying for homes that they typically lived in for decades at a fixed monthly payment, yet their incomes were rising rapidly because they were keeping up with high inflation. Fast forward today, we're very mobile. My advice to people today is unless you can put 20% down, unless you think you're going to live there for at least 5 years, and unless your total housing costs are going to be a quarter or less of your gross income, you really want to think long and hard before taking the plunge in buying.
That is definitely something that people are rethinking these days with the housing market doing what it's doing. All right, so now what about the saying that credit cards are bad? A lot of people tend to think credit cards are the root of why they are in such financial distress, but you say not necessarily.
So it's interesting. Credit cards themselves are not bad. It's the way we use credit cards that makes them bad. And credit cards are this odd sort of financial beast because they ironically can actually be your friend if you use them the quote right way, which is simply as a convenience or as an intra-month manager of your cash flow. And when the bill comes at the end of the month, you pay it off on time and in full. Where people went so wrong with credit cards was in feeling like they were free money and charging things on them that they couldn't afford to pay.
Right. Well, speaking of things that a lot of people feel that they can't afford to pay but will take out huge loans to do, our next rule of thumb is that you can never spend too much on a good education. You know, if you do whatever you need to do to pay for it, it'll always pay off. But you say not necessarily.
Oh, and Tanya, this is the rule of thumb that is hardest for me to talk about because I am a classic product of this. You know, I come from an immigrant heritage, and education absolutely played a role in all that I've been able to do with my life so far. But what's happened is in the past, this equation where you go to school and it was worth it at any price because your income would continue to accelerate so fast that you'd be able to pay off those loans in a reasonable amount of time, that rule is broken down. And so I'd like to point out that, you know, it's not worth it to spend $100,000 on a pricey private education if you're going to choose a career that's going to cap out at an income of $50,000 a year. The math just won't work. You won't be able to pay off the debts and do other things that you might like to in your life.
And it certainly might not be worth it for your parents either if they're taking out huge loans to fund that.
Tanya, such a good point, and certainly not having your parents take that money out of their retirement accounts.
Right. All right. Now, finally, the last financial rule you say we should rethink is everyone must buy life insurance. Why is this not necessarily true?
So, this is interesting. I've actually had several young people say to me, well, I have life insurance. And I said, do you have kids? No. And I'll ask, why do you have life insurance? They said, well, my parents would be very sad if I passed, if I died. What? And I'm thinking, well, yes, your parents would be very sad, but the purpose of life insurance is to make sure if there's anybody who is financially dependent upon you, that there's enough funds and enough time for them to be able to get themselves back on their feet again. And so for the vast majority of us, unless you have children, you have no need for life insurance. And if you do have children, typically the most cost-effective form of life insurance is what's called term life insurance.
Right, and that's where you just pay a little bit to be insured for a short amount of your lifespan. I guess until the kids that you're looking out for are able to stand on their own 2 feet.
Exactly, Tanya. For most people, 10 to 15 times your income will give your children enough time to pass in order to get back on their feet.
Now, what if, let's turn this around for a second. What if you are a child whose parents are dependent upon your income in the first situation?
Now that is a great question, because that would be one of those incidences where I would say, yeah, then it does make sense. You have somebody that is dependent upon you. And in that case, once again, it would be term life insurance that I would recommend as opposed to whole life insurance to give you the most efficacious way of helping your parents in the sad event that something happened to you and you passed on.
Sure. All right, Manisha, thank you so very much. This was very useful.